Welcome back to the Delaware Way. I just read that somehow we have $64 million more. Is that right?
So DFAC meets, which is the Delaware Economic Forecasting and Advisory, Finance and Advisory Council, that meets 6 times a year. We had our most recent meeting in September. We looked at all the forecasts of the various revenues over and above the revenue package that was passed this year. There was an additional $64 million. Spread really over a 2-year period. So it was $30 million that we missed our forecast last year, another $30 million that carries into this current fiscal year. That sounds like a lot of money, but in a $4.1 billion budget, and people don't like to hear it, it is literally a rounding error. I mean, it is a very small percentage relative. It's less than 1%.
So we're not out of the woods
off of our
with that.
forecast. We're not out of the woods. There's only 1.2% revenue growth expected in fiscal year 19. Or excuse me, our actual budget growth was 0.5%, not 1%. It was half of 1%. Right. And if you break that down into the categories of education versus everything else, education went up 2.8% to fund continued growth in enrollment in our schools and to fund that more and more kids are being identified as having special needs and therefore requiring more money. The education budget grew 2.8%. Everything else actually shrank about 0.5%. So, you know, that's the environment that we're in, which is, you know, even while we're shrinking the overall budget, we do have these annual requirements to fund, you know, growth in the number of kids in our schools, growth in healthcare costs, inflation costs, and so, you know, that's why the governor has proposed that, you know, we ought to look at ways to broaden the tax base.
You know, every time somebody hears what you just said, they think, oh, my taxes are going up.
So, well, look, Delaware has among the lowest, if you take all the taxes combined and you look at what's actually being paid by individuals. So you look at, you know, the personal income tax and property taxes and no sales tax. So you combine those 3 things together, we have among the lowest taxes in the country.
So taxes are going up?
Usually, well, I think the question is you know, and this came up in the budget, in the budget discussions. We have some of the lowest property taxes in the country, certainly the lowest in the region, and yet, you know, we are paying 60 to 65% of all education costs. So we're paying it out of taxes that we have traditionally been able to export. And when the governor is talking about some of these challenges, you know, these things we have been able to export in the past, whether it's the bank franchise tax or lottery revenues where 2/3 of those revenues were coming from people outside the state before we had competition with Pennsylvania and Maryland. If you look at the corporate franchise tax, of which 95% of it is exported to businesses around the world and around the country, we've been very fortunate to be able to rely on those revenues. The question is, can we continue to rely on those revenues?
You're making the argument without answering the question, though. Does that mean taxes do have to go up? There's no other way out of this?
I think that there are things that we're trying to do. There were a number of groups that were formed, you know, at the beginning of this administration. That one of which I'm chairing. There's a group called the Government Efficiency and Accountability Review Board, and we're trying to do what it's very common for new governors to come in and do a top-to-bottom review of state government and try to grab some low-hanging fruit. And certainly the previous administration did that, and the administration before that did that. And we've picked most of the low-hanging fruit. What we need to be engaged in now, and what GEAR, Government Efficiency and Accountability Review, we call it GEAR, is really doing what the private sector tries to do, which is look at every single year, where are there opportunities to be more efficient, more effective, to reduce our costs?
I understand there's also a financial reality and a political reality, and nobody likes to hear that taxes may possibly go up. So it's a difficult question for anybody involved in office to answer. I would imagine if there was if there wasn't the political part of it, it would be an easy answer.
So it might be.
Yeah.
I mean, look, for any business, if your expenses are going up, your revenues need to go up. Right. So, you know, revenues will go up, and they'll continue to go up. They've been going up for, you know, 200 years of Delaware's existence. So that I'm confident that revenues will go up. The question is, will rates need to go up, or will certain forms of income that we currently exclude? I mean, that is one of our challenges, is that, you know, we tax certain forms of income, but we have many, many forms of income that we don't tax in Delaware, that we've made exempt, particularly some things we did in the 1990s when we had a lot of unclaimed property, when it was a brand new revenue source, when lottery revenue was going from 10 million a year to $270 million a year, back when the bank franchise tax was collecting $160, $175 million a year, when today it only results in $85 million a year. But back in those days, there were a number of exemptions that were built into the tax code for people when they turned age 60 or when they turned age 65, or broadening the base of income that's not included. And part of our challenge is that we've got the tax base that we're taxing, but then you've got a whole part of the tax base that we're not taxing at all. Forms of personal income that we're choosing not to tax. And that is something that we need to look at.
And with that, we have to end it. We'll have to wait to see what happens when the budget comes around. I really appreciate you coming in. Secretary of Finance Rick Geisenberger. When we come back, there will be a rate hike in Delaware if you get your power or electricity from Delmarva. The question is, how much? We'll talk about it when the Delaware Way continues.